Alberta wants more pipelines and they want them yesterday. But unlike the years of yesterday, polls are now showing that the whole country is on board with doing exactly that. And because of this, we now see pipeline news everywhere. Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith is leading a proposal for a West Coast pipeline. Mark Carney is hinting at reviving the Keystone XL pipeline with the United States, and there are talks of so many more. So clearly, Canada is interested in expanding its crude oil exports. But will this talk translate into action? Well, in this video, what I am not going to do is give you a definitive answer to that question because I don't think anybody really knows. A lot of these discussions are just that, discussions. Worse still, it is 2025 and things change by the day. In fact, I had to rewrite this whole stupid script because I got blindsided by the whole Keystone thing. Instead, what I will do in this video is summarize all the different moving parts that may impact those final decisions so we can better understand the world of crude oil exports. And we're going to do that by touching on three main topics. Firstly, the regulations, or the possible lack thereof. Secondly, we're going to touch on the economics and how selling more oil doesn't always mean more money. And lastly, because this is a climate change YouTube channel, we will touch on how these pipelines fit into a world that is currently undergoing a green transition. If these are topics you want to hear more of, make sure to subscribe. But with all of that said, my name is Matthew. These two pieces of paper have very little to do with pipelines, so take all I'm saying with a grain of salt. And you are watching Carbon Anonymous. Alright, so we can't talk about Canadian pipelines without first addressing First Nations. No, I'm gonna say that 10 times fast. Now, while protests may catch the news and the headlines, it's actually the legal issues here that have more sway in these discussions. In Canada, First Nations have a constitutional right to be consulted and accommodated when a project could negatively affect treaty rights, which is usually the case with pipelines. Now, this wording, consult and accommodate, is important because it doesn't necessarily mean that First Nations can just thumbs up or thumbs down any projects. Instead, what is actually required is that those building the projects, they have to engage in good faith discussions with First Nations and give serious consideration to their concerns. And if they fail to do that, that's when things get illegal. Indeed, Canada's most recent pipeline, the Trans Mountain Expansion that opened recently, it actually had its approval removed in 2018 for this exact reason and had to restart the approval process all over again. And because time is money, delays like this are no good. So it's no surprise that the Alberta government, who is leading this new West Coast pipeline proposal, is coming out swinging with big programs to secure First Nations support. Or, at the very least, show that they're trying to meet those constitutional requirements. Which segues to the next governmental issue with pipelines, which is regulation. In Canada, much to the chagrin of Alberta, pipelines are federal jurisdiction. And in the last several years, the Trudeau government has implemented several policies that apply to pipeline development. And while these policies all do very different things, together they, at least in the opinion of the oil and gas companies, make pipeline development completely unviable. But Canada, of course, now has new leadership that is pretty keen to show the world that what we lost in sex appeal, we gained in economic prowess. Mark Carney's new C5 bill, the Major Projects Bill, made it so that certain projects could bypass a lot of these regulations if it's considered, quote, national interest, which, interestingly enough, Mark Carney has also repeatedly stated could apply to pipelines. This could be great news for oil companies who are getting exactly what they asked for. In fact, the Alberta government is currently working on a proposal to get pipelines approved as projects of national interest. So with the lessons learned from First Nation consultation and regulatory hurdles potentially being sidelined, I guess it's time to move on to our next chapter and discuss the economics of pipelines to learn why, even though these companies may have the perfect political ticket to build pipelines, they have, at least of writing this video, not cashed in. Although the political wind has now started blowing in favor of oil companies, it seems like this has happened just as the economic wind has started to get a little shaky. Because currently, largely thanks to the efforts of Canada's southerly neighbor, oil prices are low, which is good for us consumers, but it's not necessarily good for oil companies because their product is quite literally selling for less. And historically, oil companies don't like to invest in expansion when prices are low because that would only drive down prices even more. So that's the first reason why these companies aren't jumping right in, right? Cheap oil prices.
The second reason has to do with the current business strategy oil sands companies are currently implementing. And it is a strategy that you can catch a glimpse of by analyzing the recent news coming out of the oil sands. Recently, Imperial Oil laid off 20% of their workforce, more than 900 workers in their Calgary offices. Enbridge is optimizing existing pipelines, hoping to get a better return on existing infrastructure. And lastly, most companies are now opting to return cash flow to investors rather than investing in infrastructure.
All of this news reads more like a consolidate and cash out strategy more than it sounds like one of expansion, and there's good reason for that. These oil companies have historically not actually made that much money for investors, and they're trying to fix that by implementing these strategies. So even if they did want to pivot and invest in expansion, you have to convince quite a few investors that that's the right strategy. Essentially, you're saying, listen, we know we've promised you some money, but we're going to change strategy again. We're going to invest that money in pipelines instead. So hopefully you can get even more money later. So that's the second reason. You have to get your investors on board. Now, the last reason has to do with the scale of what this investment may look like. Simply put, pipelines aren't cheap. And both Mark Carney and Danielle Smith have been pretty adamant that they want private dollars going into this, not taxpayer money. But it's not just investing in a pipeline. You also have to expand the production of oil that go into that new pipeline, which for the oil sands is also very expensive, right? While the oil sands can operate for relatively cheap, and that's their competitive advantage, it costs a lot of money to build up the infrastructure to grow the oil sands. And even on top of that, I am betting that the federal government will likely tie these new projects together with carbon capture to show that they aren't completely abandoning their climate change commitments. And shocker, carbon capture isn't very cheap either. So it's not really just as simple as building more pipelines. You have to do a lot of extra work, and that pushes this into some pretty expensive territory. So that's the last problem. The cost. All of this together, at least for me, explains why no company has actually stepped up yet to say they want to build these pipelines. I think they still need to assess whether they think there's a strong business case to do so, which there very much could be. All of these previously mentioned problems could change. Additionally, investments aren't necessarily made based on the conditions of today, but where you believe the world is going to be in like 5 years' time, because that's when these investments actually start to pay off. Which leads us to what I think is the most important caveat: the future of oil as green technology continues to scale. I'm going to jump into some heavy statistics here just to establish where we are in this transition, because I think a lot of people have a misconception of what is going on right now. In 2024, globally, 1 in every 5 cars came with an electric plug. So that includes hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and full EVs. And that is projected to become 2 out of every 5 cars by 2030. And I am mentioning EVs specifically here because it's very important for oil demand. But we're seeing this across many sectors. In fact, thanks in large part to growth in these technologies, the International Energy Agency projects that oil demand may peak by as soon as 2030. Now, I assume that many of you watching, especially if you're from North America, may be thinking, what is this guy talking about? All I see on the news is that EV sales are slowing and the world is abandoning its green transition. Well, I would argue first that many of those claims are grossly exaggerated, but if there's an inkling of truth in that sentiment, it is that our transition, at least in North America, has certainly been less than what we had hoped or planned for. When we look at this green transition, it is pretty clear that North America is not the leader. In fact, it's probably lagging, especially when you compare it to what's going on in places like China, who has taken such a clear lead that they're now being referred to as the world's first electro state. Now, why should we care? Well, Canada wants to export our oil to those countries, right? One of the main reasons Canada wants to build so many of these pipelines is because we're trying to diversify away from the US. And oil, at least right now, more than 90% of our oil is shipped directly to the US. So the question becomes, who is going to buy this oil if it's not the US? Is it Asia? Well, I don't know, right? Their demand has slowed significantly, largely thanks to green tech. Is it Europe? Well, I don't know as well, right? Their demand has actually been shrinking since the 2020s. Canada can certainly produce more oil. We have the third largest reserve in the world. The limiting factor here is who's going to buy. And ironically, it may actually be the US that will continue to be our best customer. Between this current administration and everything they're doing to sabotage their own green transition, and also the fact that their own oil reserves are slowing down significantly, Canadian oil may only become more important to them, which is why I think the Keystone XL pipeline is being revived. But then if Canada builds more pipelines to the south, we're not diversifying, and that goes against the whole reason why we wanted to build more pipelines in the first place. Double but, however, Canada is also in a current trade war, and these pipelines could become a really big bargaining chip for us. What I am trying to get across here is that there are many things that we have to consider right now, and we have some very big decisions ahead of us with lots of money on the line, right? All these questions: who's building these pipelines? Where are they gonna go? How much oil will they move? Who's going to buy? These are all questions that aren't settled at all, which is why I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen, and we're going to have to play it by ear. Now, like I said at the start, this is a climate change YouTube channel, so go figure I'm not optimistic on oil expansion. But I did want to lay it all out because there's so many moving parts with these projects, it's hard to make sense of them sometimes. So I think people just kind of default to the conclusion that they already want it to be true, whether that be on the pro-pipeline side or the anti-pipeline side. Now, if you have any opinions or you think I missed something, make sure you put them in the comments below. I'd love to hear if I've missed the mark here. But with that said, my name is Matthew. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so the algorithm knows that this video didn't suck. But with that being said, you've been watching Carbon Anonymous. My name is Matthew, and thank you for stopping by.